why don't you walk us through what some characteristics of a business that may consider this type of plan?
That's a great question. So because of the nature of how an ESOP works, and we're going to really focus on what they call a leveraged ESOP,
Yep.
which is when there's cash or sort of dollars coming out of the value of the business to the selling shareholder, which is the most common approach. Um, it's really the term in the industry is called a leverage buyout. We're actually borrowing money. The company's going to borrow the money on the value of the business. That cash comes into the corporation, and the corporation is going to write the check to buy the stock from the selling shareholders, either partial sale or 100% sale. And so the key is when you talk about a leverage buyout, cash flow is the most important. You know, the saying is the three most important things in real estate are always location, location, location. The three most important things in an ESOP, since it's a leverage buyout, is cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. So what I mean by that is anybody that's going to consider doing an ESOP has to understand that they have to have relatively consistent cash flow on a year-by-year basis to be able to support the company's ability to be able to finance and pay off that debt that it's taking on to buy the company over time. So think about it from the opposite perspective. Companies that wouldn't really qualify or be good candidates for an ESOP, think about real estate developers. You know, while they're building out their, one or two, let's say, apartment buildings, which take them 18 to 24 months to complete, they're going to the bank, they're usually leveraging the company up, they're borrowing money, they've got a small portion of equity that they put into buying the land, but it's a leverage transaction. They're paying interest on their note, or they're rolling the interest up until they get it built. So during that 2 to 3 year time frame until they get the get the apartment leased up, there's really no cash flow coming back to the developer. That would be a very poor transaction of an ESOP. But on the opposite side, think about the general contractor that actually is constructing it on behalf of the builder. That general contractor is constantly receiving cash flow from the developer for the build out of the property as they hit certain metrics. And that cash flow is usually pretty consistent. They usually go into a project if they're a good general contractor, knowing how to manage the overhead of the project. They've got subs they can rely on. So they really know what their profit margins are going to be at the end of the road. And so contractors or any of the subcontractors, engineering firms, any firm that really has consistent cash flow from a financial perspective makes a good candidate. The other component to that is, again, getting back to the philosophy. It's getting back to an owner. Since the too big to fail of 2008 and the changes in the banking industry, banks are limited today under their FDIC guidelines of how much of a loan they can actually provide to a business today. And that usually is no more than 3 times what they call EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So if your business sells at, let's say, a 6 multiple to make it simple, so you've got 5 million of EBITDA, you've got a 6 times 5 or a $30 million valuation. The most that a bank would ever lend on that type of transaction would be 3 times. So in that case, it would be 15 million of the $30 million sale. The second portion, if you're going to sell 100% of the company, would be taken back as a seller note. So the sellers would take back a note. There's some advantages of doing that, but the byproduct is they're only getting 15 million of cash up front. The rest is coming from cash flow over a period of time once the bank gets paid off, and then they get paid off principal and interest after that takes place. So for an owner that really wants to just walk away, take their cash, an ESOP shouldn't be considered because of that delayed sort of financial ramification. Whereas if you hire an investment banker and sell to a private equity firm or a strategic buyer, in those cases, you usually get 70 to 90% of the price of what you're selling it for in cash up front. You've got a small portion you may roll back in if it's a private equity deal, or you might have an earnout with a strategic buyer. But either way, you're getting the vast majority of your money up front. It allows you then to take your money, walk away from the business. And for owners that are really looking at that strategy, they're really not interested in sticking around. And it's not that they don't care about their management team and their employees. They just are more focused on what the financial ramifications are for them and their families. And that's fine. That's just not what an ESOP is.